Welcome to another episode of Breaking Into Cybersecurity, where today we have Stuart Mitchell will be giving us insight into the world of cybersecurity recruiting. He is from Hampton North, a amazing headhunting firm that he started from scratch. So we're going to jump into that story in a little bit. But first, Stuart, what got you into the cybersecurity space?
Chris, great question. And first of all, thanks for having me on. So I had floated my way around recruiting at the early stages of my career, some generalist technology, some work in the ERP space where I really got to understand how businesses work from a technology perspective. And it happened in around 2014, 2015, where I really started to see an opportunity for me in terms of the world falling very short and technology teams falling very short in the cybersecurity hiring space. But I think more so an industry and rightly or wrongly, an industry that I personally connected with. I struck myself as somebody who maybe has a little bit of professional paranoia and is very much a skeptical person. And I think as a cybersecurity recruiter, I think the one of the ingrown DNA of folks that I deal with on a daily basis is that kind of always looking at the worst outcome paranoia. So it was an industry that I found personally very interesting, but B, that I felt most connected to the people, which is important if you're going to hang your hat on something for a long period of time.
So, what about it decided to make you go out and start your own business? It's one thing to work as a recruiter under someone else, but now you went out and started your own firm.
Yeah. So I think I've always enjoyed starting and building and growing things. And I've always been quite gritty and very focused on let's just get stuff done. Don't worry about the red tape. Don't worry about the politics of all of this. Let's just do an exceptional job. And I think what I found was being part of a business that was growing, I found myself more and more running into frustrations and challenges and more mouths to feed and sometimes territorial inefficiencies and things like that. And it got to a point where I can only do so much in terms of suggesting improvements and figuring out what I think the best way to do this is. And you can only do so much to the point where it's okay, I think I can do it better. So, time to put my money where my mouth is and spin up and go out on this journey on my own. So, at 15, 16 months, I took the plunge. I wouldn't say because I had the natural, like, entrepreneurial spirit. I never wanted to put my name on anything. I never wanted to go solo, but more to build so I have two outcomes that I want out of this business. One is to provide, to be the best cybersecurity recruiting company in the world. And I think it's really hard to justify that as a metric. So I go mostly as reputationally the best. I think metrics wise, everything is a little harsh, but I want to be known as the best, but also to be a home. There are lots of very good other cybersecurity recruiters. I want to create a business that makes them want to be part of and be at home there so that we can, like in an ideal world as a founder, I would like to monopolize the industry. I don't think I'll ever get to that size and scale, but those individuals I want to feel very welcome here, want to be part of this.
So, what are some of the problems that you see in the industry, and how are you going about fixing them?
So the industry is very different to what it was even 2 years ago, right? I think we've gone the industry's almost been turned on its head in the last 18, 24 months. Over the years that I've worked in this space, it's been very candidate led. So candidates have had multiple opportunities, multiple, if anyone put a resume out there, the recruiters would call, their network would call, and it would be fairly easy and interesting, no stress to find a new job. I think we're going through somewhat of an inflection point that I've seen starting to go upwards from a trend perspective, where I feel like the industry is in somewhat of a better spot. But a lot of kind of some of the things that I am looking at, talking more on the client side, is just to not to fall into short-term thinking. That's potentially taking advantage of laid off folks by making salary demands that aren't up with where they were. And again, I know that as an industry, we were exceptionally well paid for a number of years, but I don't think we need to potentially be seeing the decrease that we're seeing right now. I know that there's also macroeconomically, there is a battle to reduce inflation, which is like payroll is part of that. And that's a much deeper issue. But I think not trying to be, the English call it penny wise and pound foolish, where you save $1 today and lose $1,000 tomorrow by losing the program or hiring only for somebody to move on. So I think what I'm really trying to get to is a comfortable middle ground where sometimes we're over here. And in previous years, it was educating clients and candidates always to meet in the middle, because most of the time, not everybody gets everything they want, but compromise is a wonderful place. So I think right now we're seeing a migration, and we've talked about this in the past, with a heavy return to office with no real clear instruction as to why, reduce salaries, reduce scope. So I just think the industry needs to be smart, because yeah, we're hurting for a little bit, but the reality is peaks and troughs will always exist in our industry, and the attacks are not going away. You flick on every day and it's a new company in headlights. It's a case of not being too short-term minded when it comes to hiring in security, which is, I think, one of the bigger issues that companies are facing right now. Is I think we're going to see a huge amount of turnover post-election next year.
So, along the lines of penny wise, pound foolish, do you see that companies are currently creating talent development pipelines so that when they do hire more junior candidates, they have that growth opportunity for them so that they're not just hiring a senior candidate with nowhere for them to grow?
So the answer is yes, but nowhere near as much as it needs to be. If I was to go and interview every CISO of, let's say, a reasonable security team, right? So anyone with a team of 10 or more, I could probably go and get data on this. I would estimate, based on the knowledge that I have, that probably only 15 to 20% of companies are ready for this. And I don't know if you feel the same way. I look at some companies that do this wonderfully, but there's only a limited amount of seats. And that's where the future of cybersecurity is to come from. And I look at some of these wonderful CISOs, sometimes within smaller companies who are operating on much tighter budgets, that will hire somebody from customer service or hire somebody from help desk or within HR teams and offer training or bring their intern on full time. But I think there is such an immediacy to fix the problem now, and also like a short term minded. It's almost like a sports coach needs to win now or they lose their job. I feel like some security functions are in win now mode, and that doesn't really allow them to create long-term talent. And normally folks who come through who are trained are the most loyal. They're the people who have people like me not in their inbox every day because they're new, they're learning. And I think loyalty, we become more skeptical and cynical the longer we're in our career. So I think loyalty tends to start early, but without that early stage talent pipeline, we are missing that. And again, it's a long-term problem, and we're playing for short-term gains right now.
And thinking of short-term gains, you see some companies trying to take advantage, trying to automate where possible using AI. What are your views on that and how it could affect hiring?
So AI done well can be amazing. Do not get me wrong, there is a huge value for automation in certain processes. And I think we've looked at the role as a software engineer within a security function, looking at security automation, security operations automation engineering, proactive detection and response. And done right, the thing can hum and it adds a certain amount of value. That said, letting the cat amongst the pigeons and allowing that to entirely open your trusting something that is going to run your system is likely going to be more trouble than it's worth. I still don't think we know what this is capable of. I still think most companies don't have a responsible AI policy. Most companies, I think there's 13% of companies are still putting production code into OpenAI or equivalents, and so they no longer own that data. So it's terrifying what people, the reality is it can do a lot, but there's cause and effect. And I don't think we're seeing as much of the effect, but expecting it to be a golden bullet without guardrails or without provision and using hope as a strategy, you may save 2 headcount right now, but you're going to need 50 headcount in to come and clean the mess up that you made. So again, going back to penny wise, pound foolish, it can be executed and People have demonstrated that it can be of value, but it's not a plug and play thing. You need the right people to make this thing work. Otherwise, you're going to cause way more issues on the back end. It's like building a cheap house on bad foundations.
So you mentioned earlier that there is a lot of call for return to the office, artificially shrink the talent that companies can find because now you're back to limiting the talent pool to their geographic area? Or do you think because employers are in control, you're going to have candidates that are moving to those areas in order to get the role?
So the answer is yes to both questions. Look, there is a very heavily mandated R2R focus across the United States. And I don't, my personal opinion is that the reason behind it is because of a lot of benefits to the company from a financials perspective, from an optics perspective, and that's okay. I don't know that it's communicated in that way. And I think some people are treated a little bit like children. Like, as an example, if you've spun up an office and promised 50,000 jobs to the state of, I don't know, Texas as an example, you will get tax benefits. But those people have to be there. And if you, as a CEO, said, hey, we brought on this office space and brought jobs to Texas, we need to be in the office 3 days a week, or we lose X funding and I have to let 25% of the company go, I think people will respect that a whole lot more than potentially what they're told and what the message is across the country. It does limit talent pools. The way I look at it as an individual who runs a remote business is personally, I would look like the best person for the job. And the best person could be in Omaha, Nebraska. They could be in San Francisco. They could be in another country. Like it just, you don't know, right? And I think you limit yourself. I think people are slow to relocate now because you look at how many people have been in situations where they're fourth month and they're getting the call from HR of, hey, it's not your fault. We mismanaged, we mishired. And if you've uprooted your life for this job in wherever the city may be and you're behind, that's very difficult. On top of the fact that a lot of people are on 3% mortgages because they bought their house before 2021 or they refinanced. And now that is not the case. So if you are moving even potentially to a cheaper cost of living, 3% isn't coming back. That's the reality of it. It's just not going to for the foreseeable. So a lot of people don't want to leave that behind. And I completely understand why you wouldn't, because it's such an amazing deal. So I think there's lots of mini factors. And again, I think that's probably more for folks in the 30 and above category. I always feel like folks before the kids come along, before you settle down, you have a little bit more flexibility and you have a little bit more fluidity. And maybe at the other end of the spectrum, the empty nesters have that freedom. Hey, I always wanted to spend a few years in Chicago. But most of the working population is between the ages of 30 and 50. They have kids, they have responsibilities, they have families. And so I could very much understand why folks would not want to leave it a 3% mortgage behind. And that's a big driving factor when it comes to taking a new job and moving your family.
And as we think about educating employers or candidates, the new way, the way the pendulum have adjusted, what tips do you have for that?
Be pragmatic. I think there is 2021 may not come back for a little while. And I think we got so used to the 15 messages every day from a recruiter about an amazing opportunity that allowed us to feel very in control of our situation. And we were always promised as cybersecurity folks that we would always be in control of our situation, that there will always be another job. I think a level of pragmatism needs to be found. Maybe you're not going to get the money that you made the last time. Maybe the company may not be as exciting. But the reality is every company needs cybersecurity. And it might not be the huge fintech. It might not be the next upshot startup, but manufacturing, insurance, healthcare, there are plenty of folks who do need cybersecurity. And yes, maybe they don't pay as much as they did before, but I think there is an essence of satisfaction. A good friend of mine, CISO for fintech for 10 years, took a CISO job in like more of a blue collar like utilities company. And he said, I'm so much happier. I don't make the money I used to make, but after 5 o'clock, I don't get emails. There's not this built in. If I do, there's a real problem. but it's not a passive aggressive CEO saying we need to deploy to prod at 11 o'clock because emergencies are saved for emergencies. And so there is, I thought, a process about being really validated in what you do, being happy, potentially getting a work life balance. Again, I know that everybody needs to earn and then everybody also needs to learn, but sometimes stable is sexy again, and that's a world that we're in right now, is those companies that haven't done layoffs that are moving forward. So it's very difficult to yearn for what we've always had, in the same way that a grieving process is tough because you want something back and it may not come back, and maybe it will. And I hope it does. It was a wonderful few years for me and my family and the entire recruiting industry, and also for folks in business. But I think be pragmatic. I don't think it ever hurts to ask for more, whether that's flexibility, whether that's responsibilities or a faster promotion or something along those lines. But companies, I don't think, are doing this to be spiteful. I don't think there is an essence of how we're going to get to you. I think everyone's doing the best that they can, and rightly or wrongly, again, a few like mega CEOs aside, I think most businesses are just trying to do the best with what they can and hire the best with the budgets they've been given. But it is really easy to feel, to some extent, victimized, because it's like, hey, I feel like you're taking advantage of me because these folks years ago were paying me this. I think everyone is just doing their best and understanding that on the other end of a what feels like a corporation is just another person doing the best that they can.
Well, I'm the same victimized. We keep years of ghost time. Either Twitter thing, and then or vice versa. Probably the communication being in recruiter and I believe someone bought it.
So there's a couple of ways, and I think there's almost levels to this, right? So I think, look, the first thing is everyone is human. I am a perennially disorganized person. So I miss stuff, I see stuff. And I think the way I look at it is I'm never being ghosted after one nudge. You can nudge someone two, three times, and the language can improve. Not necessarily improve, but the language can get a little tougher. Hey, you said you were going to get this before the end of the day. You didn't. Can you get that to me today? And I think a lot of people are, hey, I sent one message, I sent an application or whatever, I was ghosted. I think recruiters were also wiped in this kind of new era, right? No industry has really been hit harder than the recruiters because no one is growing at the scale that they were. But there's a lot of overwhelmed people on the other end who are spinning a lot of plates and are very busy. But I think we sometimes it's just easier to blame, in the same way that when your flight's delayed, we blame the attendants. I think sometimes it's not their fault and they're doing the best they can. And sometimes they are very busy and just need a nudge. In the same way, on the candidate side, look, I think you can always tell the level of interest in terms of how excited and how the feedback is. I think, look, as a seasoned recruiter, if somebody's not getting back to me after three or four times, like for me, that shows they're probably not that interested or they have questions. And for me, it's, hey, cool that as a recruiter, I would call that out. Look, you were we were speaking every day when this was exciting, and now picking up on behavior patterns, you're not getting back to me. Should we just leave this there? I think there's, as a recruiter, I try not to get emotionally attached to outcomes because most of the time on both sides, it's a no. We only get yes very often. So it's very tough if you become emotionally attached to that one hit every now and then that you get. So I think just being understanding of the process and understanding that it's people on both ends of the spectrum and no one is doing anything spitefully. Yeah, and I genuinely believe that. Don't get me wrong, people are unorganized, people are can be stupid, people can get busy, like life is just tough. But I think remembering that there is a human at the other end and being cordial for that. Hey, if I miss a message and someone gets back to me the day after, like screaming at me or whatever, and it has happened, like, hey, like my kid got sick. Like I'm a human. My kid was screaming all night. I'm gonna get back to you. And I think I read something the other day, and a great example of this is like when you're driving and you're driving behind a car that's going 15 miles an hour in a 30, and it's, what are you doing? Come on, I got somewhere to be. Always come up with the best situations in your head, and it's really hard to do, but like maybe they have an amazing cake in there because it's their kid's birthday. And I think trying to see the good in the situation, as frustrating as it may be, and giving the benefit of the doubt, I think longer term is better for your mental health, but people don't forget how you treated them. And I think there's so many people, I know thousands of people in this space. I haven't placed 1,000 people, but I always think whether I place them or not, I would like to give them a good experience and be honest and follow up. And I can't help everyone. If I'd placed everyone, I would be in a huge house and I would have retired by now and life would be oh so wonderful. But I always respect that I may run into somebody again and people don't forget. So I think the relationship, it's really easy to be angry at someone in a frustrating time. And the recruiter candidate relationship should be better. There is no one there to police that. But I just think as a candidate, think if they didn't get back to you, give them the benefit of the doubt with a couple of follow ups and then say, hey, you can give them feedback. Hey, this is not how I would like to be treated. I think there's always a respectful way to say, hey, like this is not for me because of that. Or did I do or say something? I think the blow ups don't help anybody, but I also appreciate that there's people that have been on the job market for months that feel so close to something and it gets taken away from them by what feels like the recruiter. And normally the recruiter just has the bad news and sometimes they're scared to give it. And that's weakness. And they should not be, if you're uncomfortable delivering bad news, you shouldn't get the glory of delivering good news. But it is sometimes the recruiter is just scared to say, hey, it's not you, which is very difficult. It's not a fun part of our job.
Speaking of the different parts of the job, what are the different players in the game? There's sourcers, there's recruiters, and different folks. Who are the different folks that are, what are their roles and how are they?
So interestingly, every business is structured differently. So you will walk into some businesses that structure it where someone is, and this is either on agency side, more client facing, and you speak to the decision makers, you take the briefs, etc. You will then have the sourcers who do a lot of the background work, and then you'll have the recruiters who do the qualification, they do the negotiation, etc. In some organizations, you'll have what is full cycle, which is they do everything. And then in agency recruiting staffing, you'll have folks who are either just speaking to clients, just speaking to candidates, or, and this is actually a very like, this is the kind of British way, which is you speak to clients and candidates so that you manage the full relationship throughout the process. So I think sometimes it's strange because you'll speak to Peter, who will pass you over to Jessica, who will pass you over to Sanjay, who will pass you over to, and it feels like sometimes you're being a bit passed around. And I think that can be frustrating. I think from a candidate side, it's tough to understand because there is no one consistent process. And sometimes you'll have an extra person who's just doing scheduling, which are my favorite people in the world, the people who are doing the coordination and the scheduling, because I hate playing Tetris with calendars. It's so stressful. They're the people who get least of the glory. But they just, to me, they are a dream. But ultimately, looking at different, it's structured so differently that it is very difficult to, as a candidate, have a consistent feel because every business is run so differently. And you could have a business like mine that is 5 people to a business like a Hayes or a Michael Page who are 500,000 people. And you look at an AWS or a JP Morgan where you could be speaking to 2 different recruiters for 2 different roles that are both relevant because they're so big. And so there is no one size, which as a candidate, I can understand would be frustrating because you just want to know, am I in? What's going on? Who should I talk to? Who do I follow up with? And I think that can be a challenge at times. And I could see why that would be frustrating.
As we wrap up this segment, any final advice that you would give to candidates, to recruiters, to hiring managers that are looking to hire a recruiting company?
Look, I think the advice that I would always give is anyone that you partner with is going to be putting your reputation on the line. So don't get into a situation loosely without the thoughts that this person is going to be representing you as a candidate and you hope that they have your best interests at heart. They're going to be representing you as a client. I'm going to be taking you to market and I want to have your best interest at heart. So anytime that you bring in a broker or a recruitment partner, whatever you want to call it, they're going to be an extension of you. So I think due diligence is important. I think understanding their ethos as to how they work, whether it's, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, we work with the biggest banks and we place 500 people there and we'll give you a really good chance, but it will be a volume based situation versus a, hey, I live down the street from the hiring manager. We only do 2 or 3 deals a year there, but we know them very well and we know exactly what's right for them. And you always have the freedom to ask. You always have a freedom to, I always think the more cloak and dagger the person is being with you, likely the less you can trust them. There's nothing wrong with a recruiter saying, hey, these folks are new to me. This feels right. And they've brought me in for X reason, but I'm only going off limited data versus, hey, I can't really talk about how many placements I've done with this business, or hey, I can't really talk about candidates that I've placed for other financial institutions. It is very concerning. So I think whoever you're working with, ask questions. You don't have to do it for sake of it, but do it to feel comfortable because this person is going to be on both sides because we are mediators. We are fighting for the outcome of both parties, which is at times very frustrating because sometimes people are here and sometimes people are here and we have to get everything to here. But being able to ask quantifying questions that they're going to have your best interests at heart is very important.
Well, one last question. For those that are in cyber now, but love talking to people, how would they switch over to recruiting if that's something that they wanted to do?
It's a tough one. There's a few folks who have done it more recently. I think before doing it, put in a call into your network and ask, because I think there's a lot of folks who are like, yeah, I'll support you, whatever. And it comes down to the time and they go back to the folks who are known or on their company's preferred supplier list, etc. I think be prepared to be disappointed by people who thought were your friends or had your back because they're stuck in processes or whatever, because there's a lot of people competing for this attention. It's absolutely a way to superpower a big network if you're somebody who has always been active, always hired. I think if you're going onto the agency side, which is my side as a provider, it's a lot of effort and process to bring on clients that maybe is the bit that isn't seen. I think on the candidate side, you would likely have a leg up on the competition. It's a lot of, at times, boring work and chatting to folks who, ironically, in the mid level, can be very condescending to your role in the process because they think that they know better at times. And don't get me wrong, from a security perspective, they absolutely do. But I know what a VPN is, and you don't need to spell that out to me. So I think if there's a world where you can get on the candidate side, I think it's a great place to start. That said, if you had a network of CISOs or executives and were like, hey, I'm actually thinking about making this jump, would you use me? Would you sign an agreement with me? And actually ask that question versus what do you think? You get the feedback that you need. Because I know a lot of people who thought that they were going to get that from people and found themselves very disappointed.
Well, thank you so much for diving into all these different areas. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this. I know for many, there's a lot of myths, there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to the process and who's involved. Thanks for coming on and clearing that up.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thanks all. Have a great